Alrighty, everyone. So today's guest is a mom who's navigated a long and emotional journey through infertility, ultimately conceiving naturally, and she's here to share her story. So we're going to touch upon grief, self worth, hope, and everything in between. And I know so many women are going to feel really seen and heard through this conversation. So I'm so excited to welcome Katrina.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for having me on. What a beautiful opportunity to share my story. I'm excited. Yeah,
So, I wanted to kind of open off with for anyone who is meeting you for the first time, can you kind of share a little bit about who you are and about your journey into motherhood?
sure. So, I think if you meet me for the first time, you're going to see a beautiful 6-year-old and 4-year-old daughter and son. And you're going to think, oh my gosh, how awesome. What a cute family, which is exactly what I think we are at this stage in our life. But what you're not going to know is that it took us 6.5 years to get those little blessings. And it was a really difficult time of our lives. We married when I married my husband when I was 25 and he was 30. And I didn't have my daughter until I was 35. So there's quite a bit of a history. So I think journey to motherhood looked like, it was a very windy road that was riddled with a lot of challenges and letdowns and depression and struggle. And it not only pushed me past limits within myself and self-confidence, but also within our relationship. And yeah, I'm excited to, share a little bit more about maybe what that looked like and can provide as much detail as you think your listeners would be interested in.
So, when did you first realize that getting pregnant might not be straightforward, and what did that moment feel like and look like for you?
Yeah. So we started to try back, gosh, it was what was it, 2012, September of 2012. And, I was 29 at the time and I thought, okay, it should take anywhere from 6 months to a year, right? So when you get advisement from the clinical world, it's like 6 months to a year. And then you could kind of think about, what should you do? Well, I took it a little bit longer, maybe a little bit built on the fact that I thought if it was meant to happen, it was going to happen. I'm a very, spiritual alignment, universe, woo woo kind of person. And I thought, hey, it may take us a couple years because it's just timing and that's, all in the master plan. And so I waited about 2 years before we decided to get my husband's semen analysis. It was the first test we ever got. And it didn't really have much to say. And other than there was something that I think is really important that I'd like to highlight is it came back from the clinician saying nothing was wrong. And there was a letter attached to it, even though his morphology was a bit high, which is the shape and size of the actual sperm. But they were saying, oh, his volume's great. Basically, he has enough that there's enough good quality that you should be able to conceive. But then there was this other thing called a round cell count that I highlighted because I was, of course, over analyzing every element of that one test that we had taken after 2 years. And the round cell count was really high. And I had marked possible infection. And no one ever brought it up. I didn't think twice about it. We went on again for another, year or so before we decided to look into some other tests. So I would say right around that 2-year mark was when I really started to understand that something wasn't right and things were not working for us. They were seemingly working against us.
And I want to kind of also ask you, like, what did your day to day look like at that time? Were you taking kind of like, because I've been there as well, and I've also had a couple miscarriages, and I've taken the ovulation tests, I've done all of the things where it's just like you're constantly monitoring yourself and trying to keep track of what's
Yeah.
going on in your body. So, did you also go through that, and
Mhm.
how did that kind of affect your
Oh, yeah.
experience?
Yeah, I would say I used at the time it was iPeriod. It was a free period and ovulation tracking app. There's so many of them out there now. You could pick your app of choice these days. I mean, we're talking now, believe it or not, 12 to 14 years ago. Um, but I was a charter. The thing about me though is that my cycle was You could set an egg timer to it. It was consistent. I had no issues with my cycle. So I thought, oh, there's nothing wrong with my hormones. There's no way it's, something with hormones, which ended up eventually getting tested as well. But my day to day, yeah, I was taking vitamins. I mean, throughout the span of 6.5 years, I did anything from really restrictive diets on like a Whole 30 plan where I went on and off Whole 30 for 8 months. My husband would take selenium and CoQ10 to bolster the health of his sperm. I was taking multivitamins, different vitamins that were supposed to help with healthy egg quality. I was doing the ovulation tests. I was checking my cervical fluid to see if it was the right consistency. I was taking Mucinex to thin out and enhance my mucosal function so that it could give a better pathway for the sperm. Um, we were timing intercourse, making sure we weren't having it too frequent leading up, and then making sure that after I would sit with my legs in the air. I mean, we were doing all the things. I also eventually consulted with an acupuncturist, and I had weekly acupuncture appointments, sometimes twice a week. And then I also ended up drinking Chinese herbs from an herbalist here in Chicago that were deemed successful by 3 other people through friend chains. And I thought, let's give it a go. But it got to the point, Megan, where I was boiling these herbs, I was packing them with me for work trips, I was drinking this disgusting sludge, and nothing resulted in a pregnancy until I think it was 2017. It was the day after Mother's Day. I finally conceived. And in 2017, I was so excited. I shared on July 4th that I was going to be having this baby. And then that same day, I went home and started spotting, and I lost that baby. However, we did have it tested. It was a chromosomal abnormality. It was a non viable pregnancy. And I grieved it very, very, very hard. And I was like, gosh, it must have been the Whole 30 diet. It must have been all these things I was doing. And it didn't end up being any of those things really. And I can share more about kind of like that when it makes sense. But yeah, my day to day was obsessive. I would say whether I was scrolling Facebook groups, looking for someone who sounded and looked like me, reaching out, asking for ideas. I was voraciously reading books and researching. I was learning all about your luteal phase, all about your follicular phase. I really became a student of fertility and was really my own researcher on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and so before I kind of ask you my questions, I wanted to say I'm sorry for your loss. I
Oh,
know
thank you.
it's not easy, and I wanted to kind of just take a moment to say that. And I know that you have such beautiful children now, but it doesn't make all the losses any easier. And I know Mother's Day's coming up, so I just wanted to kind of send out my condolences because I know that it
And
must not be
mine
an
back
easy
to you,
time for you.
Megan, because you had a loss as well. So it's painful, or multiple losses. I mean, it is every time it's a unique experience for the individual. So I appreciate you, and I think statistically it's all too common to miscarry. But the more that we talk about it, the better served we are, because if nothing else, at least we're not alone. You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember when I had my first miscarriage, I felt so alone. And it wasn't until I told one of my girlfriends that I had gone through this and that I was really young at the time. And I think that the expectation from everyone around me was like, oh, you should be kind of celebrating, because you were so young, your whole life would have been ruined, whatever. And it wasn't until like I told one of my girlfriends, like, no, I'm like really heartbroken about this. Like, I'm really torn up about this. And she was like, I had one too. And she was a little bit older than me, and she kind of guided me through that. So I totally agree. I think that talking about it and sharing our story only only does good. I know that it is triggering at times, but I think that it really does help other people that might
Yeah.
be hearing or watching. And so I also wanted to kind of take it back, and you mentioned that your day-to-day was obsessive, and I really wanted to kind of highlight that because I felt the same way. I was obsessed with everything, even down to the things that I would eat. I was like, "Oh my god, like this research shows apparently that this is not good for when I'm trying to have a baby, or you shouldn't have this either." I was like limiting everyone's diet. I was out here
Mhm.
like a crazy person. And I was also in the same phase where I was reading everything that I could, and I was trying to absorb so much knowledge. And I also felt like
Yeah.
I was being dismissed in doctor's offices, and then I would try and ask these questions that I end up Googling at home, and I would be dismissed. They'd be like, "Oh, no, like, it's not time to think about this, like, you're still young, like, that's not what's going on, there's no need to worry about this at the time," and so, I
Yeah.
feel like
I
that played a
know.
lot of it too, and I was forced to kinda be my own advocate and forced to kinda take things into my own hands, and I was one of those people that as soon as I stopped taking things into my own hands is when it happened, and it was, like, kind
Wow.
of like when I least expected it, and I was very both times, it was I every time I would try and plan it, I wasn't able to get pregnant, and then
Mhm.
once I kind of let go and I was like, "You know what? It'll happen when it happens, and if not, like, there are so many other beautiful ways that I can have a child," and once I kind of accepted that, then it would happen, you know? So
Mhm.
but I did
Well,
wanna call sorry.
oh, that's wonderful that it worked that way for you. Mhm.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to kind of call also into attention that you have tried all the things, you know, like you've been through all the rabbit holes. And so I think that it's so valuable to have you on today because for people it's very overwhelming at first as well because there's so many avenues you can take and there's so many things that you can try. And so after you guys did the sperm count, what was kind of the next step for you guys?
Mhm. Yeah, and there's many other things that I did that I didn't mention, and I'll be happy to share those as well. So after the semen analysis, before the initial loss, we did go get hormone testing, and all my hormones came back straight in the middle. There was no outlier. Everything was spot on. 8 vials of blood were pulled, and all of them came back fine. That doctor then shared that even before I had the test, Megan, he said, "You're very likely to come back unexplained." And then, of course, he deemed me unexplained infertility, which to me, and I'll say this to your audience, is that just means you don't know what's causing it. And it's not really a diagnosis. In fact, I would say it should never be a diagnosis, especially with anything. There is a reason. It's just that we have to be able to think outside the box, look at things differently, and expand the way that we treat a whole person. So I'll just say that. Then, speed forward just a little bit more. I went and did a follicle count to ensure that I was producing enough, egg houses that could manifest into a healthy egg. And I was. And then from there, now we're about 6 months past the hormone testing. I went and I got a Sono HSG. So this is a saline injection Sono that was to ensure that both my fallopian tubes were open and operating and functioning well. I was deemed fine. However, they couldn't necessarily confirm my right fallopian tube at the time, but he said, nothing's backing up into your cervix, therefore, or your uterus. Therefore, I would deem this, you're probably good to go. Um, and then right before I got pregnant with the failed pregnancy, I this is important to note. I had a sinus infection, so I've struggled with sinus infections my whole life. I jokingly refer to it as short snout syndrome because I have a smaller nose. But I had a sinus infection, and on that sinus infection, during it, one of the ways to resolve a sinus infection is to take antibiotics, especially when it's like me. I get them very acutely, and I was prescribed Augmentin. And Augmentin is a combination of a couple things, and essentially it works really well with mucosal lining infections, and it's really effective at the bacteria that was causing both the sinus infection, but also ultimately what we found out to be our cause of infertility. So that is what I then years later um, identified was the reason I wasn't getting pregnant is that we ended up having a bacteria infection. And I can share more about that.
Wow, and so left field, I'm sure that that was for you because I'm sure that it's totally not what you expected, especially after spending all these years looking at your hormones, his sperm count, your anatomy, and going through
Mhm.
all the different rabbit holes and all the different supplements and all the different diets, and it
Yes.
was essentially a sinus infection.
Yes. And I will say, like I said, I was reading a lot, and there's one book in particular. I won't name it because I want to respect the person who created it, but everything was about the woman and the egg and how you basically have to overhaul every single aspect of your life. You have to get rid of all the bad cleaning products, all of the things that could be harmful to you. And I did a lot of those things. But Megan, the amount of pressure that was put on my shoulders was insurmountable at times because I thought, to your point earlier, anything that I did was because I didn't know what was preventing our conception. I thought anything that I did was preventing our conception. I stopped running. I used to run half marathons and I paused my running because I thought, oh, I'm working out too much. I need to make sure I'm not over, exerting myself. And it was a really um, constricting and self-depleting time, as you can imagine. But
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you because it sounds like through everything that you've been through, you saw, I'm sure, tons of providers.
I
So I
saw
wanted to
4 different reproductive endocrinologists and then also, a charting and hormone specialist and 2 holistic practitioners and an acupuncturist, yeah.
so I wanted to ask you, was there one provider in specific that kind of listened to you in a different way, or was it a combination of everybody working together that made the difference?
Wouldn't it be nice if they would work together? I would say
I was hoping for that answer.
yeah, yeah, so the first one, I kind of, knew right away because the first time I went to their center, it was sign off on your understanding that pursuing fertility treatment could result in multiples. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I'm not even electing to do IVF or IUI or Clomid or anything at this point. And it was really off putting. And that was the same doctor that before I was even tested told me I was likely unexplained. So it was a pretty dismissive experience. So I kind of just used that particular clinician to get some answers. And I
Mhm,
drove, I drove the tests and I requested them. And then I quickly fired that clinician, meaning I did not go back to them. Then I went to another clinician, and during that stint is when I did conceive, and we actually found out with this woman in our initial consultation. She was lovely, warm. I think she actually is above bar in terms of what you see for reproductive endocrinology in this area. She was a little bit more innovative in her approach, more holistic, and I was excited to work with her, but we were like, "Oh, we're pregnant." Okay. Well, then she ended up retiring. So after my loss and my DNC to remove the remains of the failed pregnancy, I then took time to grieve. And then I was like, okay, I got to try again. I got to try again. Now we know we can get pregnant. We were so excited. We can get pregnant. We finally did it. And we just got to get the right pregnancy. This is where we were. So I went to another reproductive endocrinologist, but this time it turned from not just unexplained infertility, it turned into a diagnosis of diminished ovarian reserve, which essentially, as we age, your ovarian reserves and your egg count goes down. It's just a natural part of aging. So, yay for us. We're living and learning, but we're also losing eggs.
mhm.
So, of course, my anti-Müllerian hormone, which is the hormone that tells us how many eggs we have, had been on the decline. So she said to me, "You may only have this much of a window of time. We need to act quick." And I knew she was pushing me to in vitro fertilization, which is a great technology for people who have used it. I know many people, many family members who have all had beautiful, perfect, healthy babies. It wasn't a path I wanted, Megan. So I grappled with the fact that this again wasn't a physician that was going to work with me on my goals. Because to me, it was equally as important how I conceived versus to just conceiving. And I got
Absolutely.
to a place where I did do an IUI, which also failed, which is the intrauterine insemination. So, you know how that works. If you don't, you guys can look it up. That failed. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, if I can't conceive naturally, I will grieve this. I actually did grieve the fact that I will never biologically be a mother of my children and that I would adopt eventually, you know? That was my like what I wanted for myself. And it's not religious. It's not anything like that. It's just that's what I wanted for myself. So I also fired that doctor. And that's when I kind of grieved the loss of what I thought my fertility would be until I decided to seek counsel from one final doctor. And that doctor, I had read his book called Making Babies. I can say his name because I've spoke with his office and I'm able to share. His name is Dr. Sammy David. He did IVF, but he also had a blend of Western and Eastern medicine. And he also takes a very different approach than anyone I had seen. However, he was in New York City. And so I waited about a year and a half. I was like, I don't even know if I could do this. And finally I was like, okay, I have to give this a try. So I contact the New York City office and I say to them, does he ever do a virtual consult? And they said, yes, he does. This is his fee. It can't be through insurance, but you can send us all your records. He will review them. He'll come on at the time Skype, back when Skype was a thing, and he'll meet with you and discuss next steps. So I did it, Megan. And I get in front of him, and he was the first and only doctor who had a smile on his face and said, Katrina, I see a lot of hope here. That was the first thing he said to me. And it still gets me very emotional because throughout all the other processes, I was so dismissed and I was so treated like cattle or like just a way to get IVF and to make money that I never felt seen until that moment. And he quickly had looked at all of my tests, all of my husband's tests. I had a lovely, I still have it here. I have to show you. This is my documents, all of my fertility stuff
Oh.
over the years. I had this Excel spreadsheet that showed every little test I did. And he said, the first thing I want you to do is a full bacterial analysis. And you have to do it with my office because no one else will test for all the bacterias that we test for. They test for mycoplasma, uroplasma, a number of other things. And what ended up being our result was staphylococcus, which is staph infection. People know it as a staph infection, which is very, very common. And we had a heavy growth staph infection that was resolved with a round of antibiotics. And in 2 months, we had conceived our daughter.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
After 6.5 years of doing all the things, then I realized the only reason why we conceived was because I had taken Augmentin, which is also very effective against staph infections. And just after my sinus infection, even though I was the only one taking it, I conceived, but there was still damage on my husband's side. So it didn't result in a healthy pregnancy. But once we did abstinence, we did the round of antibiotics, we did a retesting to make sure the infection was gone. And then we pulled the trigger. We started to try to conceive. In 2 months, we were conceived with my daughter.
Oh my god, that is so crazy.
And then even faster with my son. So we went back. I said, well, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to Dr. Sammy David. We're going to retest just in case this infection has come back. A different type of bacteria was present, and it was a bacteria that's typically found in our GI tract. And another round of antibiotics. And it was literally the first month we only tried 2 times and we were pregnant with my son.
That's
And I was 36 years old.
wow, and I think that not enough people talk about how it can be something as, and I don't wanna say as simple because I don't wanna trivialize it, but when you've tried all the things like testing your hormones and testing sperm and doing all these crazy procedures, a round of antibiotics can
It's
really be
really
the difference.
startling. Yeah, and this is why I was so excited to share my story with you, and that I have a memoir I'm writing about it. I have, I think it's really important to share. While it's not gonna be everybody's, diagnosis, the thing that's most, I think, illuminating is that my first test, the first semen analysis back in, 2014, had the high round cell count. And round cell counts are higher in the presence of bacteria or infection. And that was not analyzed appropriately. And it was not even discussed by the clinicians. And so my feelings are that if someone were interpreting the results correctly and had this information of this, how bacteria can impact fertility, we would be in a very different place, and we would have had our children much earlier. But I think it's important I went through what I went through. I mean, I look now too, Megan, back then, there was only one publication that tied Staphylococcus to impacting infertility. And now, if you look out on PubMed or through the National Health Institute, you'll find there's a myriad of publications, not just about inhibiting fertilization, but also how different strains of bacteria increases inflammation in our body and specifically our reproductive tract, and it can actually cause endometriosis. It's being tied to that now. So there's a lot of important things as it relates to bacteria that I hope science will catch up, protocols will catch up, and then we can be doing a better service to women and men trying to conceive.
Absolutely. No, and so I something that resonated with me that you mentioned earlier was how kind of you were treated like cattle. And that's exactly what it feels like, and it's because you're almost forced to be put into like this box. And
Mhm.
so they're looking for certain things that they need to check off to put you in said box, which is in vitro fertilization or whatever it might be. And
Mhm.
if they're not finding those red flags, then they're assuming that it's either unexplicable, which is kind of what you were
Mhm.
told a number of times, or that it's okay, you'll be fine. Wait a couple, years, months, whatever it might be. Everything looks normal on my end. But if
Right.
we kind of approach things and looked at things a little bit more holistically and looked at not just our reproductive organs and our reproductive hormones when we're looking at reproducing and fertility, but also just looking at everything, and
Whole
something as
health,
simple, exactly, something as simple as like a staph infection can
which
be
is so prevalent and could be
right.
from anyone at any time, and it's so common, and there's
Yeah.
measures in hospitals against staph infection because of this. And I think the biggest thing is that a lot of the tests are really focused on just straight mechanics. Do you have the parts? Are the parts working? Are the highways open? Are there enough little soldiers in the semen analysis? And it does miss all of those other things. I mean, our bodies are, and you know this, so complex. They're magnificent, but they're so complex and there's so many layers. And when I think about what does good look like, I think everyone who is experiencing infertility deserves a full bacterial analysis that encompasses anything that could be present in our reproductive tract that could inhibit healthy conception, not just only for conception, but the health of that pregnancy. And what does that even look? And I think about women with endometriosis and fibroids and how much is that has been exacerbated by a pre-existing infection. I think there's a lot we owe to the community in terms of putting measures and protocols in place because that's how clinicians operate. They need protocols, they need guidelines, and then we need payer guidelines. So there's a lot of things at play that can lead us to why things are the way they are, and then you just layer on the profitability of IVF. It's really tells a story of not doesn't paint the best light, especially it explains why we feel like cattle, you
Yeah.
know? The system isn't set up correctly to get to the root cause analysis. It's going to use measures that are effective, like IVF is 40% of the time it works, that help just kind of get people to where they want to be. It's not necessarily ever going to give answers to why they couldn't get there naturally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I do want to kind of call out that I in vitro fertilization, I know so many people that
Oh,
have
yeah. It's
conceived through in
wonderful.
vitro and they have beautiful babies, even twins, and
Yes.
so I know that that is a beautiful journey for so
It's
many people,
wonderful.
but
Yes.
I do think that kind of to your point, we need to educate providers more about the possibility that it could be something outside. There's like a saying in medicine where it's like if you hear hooves, think of horses, not zebras,
And
right? But
zebras are the rare ones. Mhm.
exactly. So, but sometimes we need to think about the zebras. Sometimes we
Mhm.
need to think about things that might not necessarily be what we're trained to think about. And so I couldn't agree more. I think that having this conversation is so important. And I wanted to ask you, so I haven't had the pleasure of reading this book by Dr. Sammy Davidson. That's his name,
Sure.
right? And Butcher,
Sammy David. Mhm.
Sammy David. I haven't had the pleasure of reading his book, so is there anything about his book that particularly stood out to you that made you think like, "Oh my god, this is the person I need to reach out to, this is the route I need to take?"
Yeah, it's so interesting, and he's old. He's an older gentleman. I don't even know if he's still actively practicing, so I don't wanna
Mhm.
send people
No, no,
anywhere.
no,
I
no, no,
just
yeah.
sure. I just want to be sure to put that disclaimer. And I also want to say that like everything I've expressed are my own individual opinions. It's not tied to any organization I work for or my any career element. So I just want to make sure that's clear too. But so that book, Megan, was I think it was 4 different types of infertility, archetypes, if you will. So it was talking through the attributes of what that person may experience and what that looks like and elements of their lifestyle. So it's all holistic and yes, there are of course still great measures to take clinically, but it was this holistic lens. So it got me thinking about holistic health, and that's what I loved. And then what I loved is that it was paired with the clinical side, right? And I think that's where the future of medicine is heading is the blend of the two. We think about this broad speaking. Now we all know how important our gut health is. And I think we think we know how important it is. And we're learning so much more as the time goes on. I think arguably the same when it comes to fertility. It's like we have to start tying that whole person together. And that's what I loved about the book is that it really painted the picture for all aspects of our lives and things to consider that could be inhibiting our pregnancies.
So I can't wait to read the book. What's the title of the book?
It's very simple. It's called Making Babies.
Making Babies.
Yeah.
That's an easy one to remember. I don't even have to write that one
Yeah.
down.
And I'd love to know what you think about it, and I haven't
Yeah.
read it in a very, very long time. In fact, I passed on my copy to someone else, and, like I said, I mean, what I went through, this may not be anyone else's experience, like you said, I may be a zebra. Now, I do think that, wouldn't it be good to know?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. It's like, wouldn't it
Yeah.
be good to know, am I a zebra or am I just a different breed of horse? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, and everybody there are zebras, like there are so many people that I'm sure might have this problem, you know what I mean? And they haven't even been educated to even think about it. You know what I mean? And
Right.
just to even I feel like I don't want to say it's easy because again, I don't want to trivialize it, but it's an easier route than some of the other things that we're kind of guided into when we're looking at an uphill battle like infertility and we're trying to conceive. There are so many other things that we're taught to think about and so many other procedures that we're inclined to take
Yes.
before testing something like this. And
Right.
so I couldn't agree more. I love that you shared the story. And I also want to kind of talk about how difficult it must have been also to, because after you've had so much loss and after you've gone through such a long battle of infertility, how did it feel to finally conceive afterwards? Was it very like joyous and exciting, or was there kind of that part of you that was like, is the other shoe going to drop?
I love the because you know this all too well with your experience, right? I was terrified. I was terrified even after my daughter was born. I thought, there's no way this is going to work. I thought something's going to happen, whether, I just thought it's going to be ripped out of my hands because 6.5 years, I mean, nothing had gone our way. Why would it go our way all of a sudden was kind of my thinking. But it did. It went great. Like I mentioned earlier, I kind of give things to the universe. I didn't elect to get any testing. I didn't elect to get any genetic testing. I didn't want to even know the gender of my child. I didn't know until she was born. And I did that because that's just the type of person I am.
I love
Not
that.
for any other reason, right? And I remember feeling really relieved because I was advanced maternal health and in age. So I was having to see, specialists and I got a level 2 and they were like, there's no signs of chromosomal abnormalities in the physical attributes of your baby. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. But leading up to that, every day was number one, I felt terrible, as we often do when we're pregnant. But I was also injecting myself with progesterone, biosimilar type progesterone in my buttocks every day, which was not easy to do. And it was, or maybe it was every other day. I can't remember the dosing, so don't quote me on it. But I remember one time I was on a work trip and nobody knew that I was pregnant, but I was having to give myself shots and I was very tired and I was waking up and I'm in this hotel and I hadn't slept well and I'm giving myself the shot and I started to get like faint and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like going to pass out. That was one of the things, but I was like, by any means necessary, I'm like, I won't touch a deli meat. I won't eat a piece of sushi. Don't bring alcohol near
Yeah,
me.
I
I'm
won't
not
even
one of
smell
those.
it.
I won't even do it, right? I was like, anything I could do to guard. So the anxiety just continued. And then I also suffered, significant postpartum anxiety and some level of depression, but mostly anxiety. I really thought that she was going to die. I mean, like it was, and I think a lot of this is a little bit of PTSD from just our journey and how tangented and depressive and challenging it was, Megan. So yeah, it didn't it wasn't like sunshine and rainbows and we thought that we were just going to be untouched. We were prepared for disaster like at any turn. So,
No, absolutely. I couldn't relate more. So I think that whole experience was all too real for me as well. And I also kind of felt like my journey into conceiving was so difficult that I was like you said, like being a mother must be very difficult as well. And I was like, if it was so hard for me to conceive her, like keeping her alive must be even that much more difficult. And I had never
yes.
cared for a baby before or anything before I
Yes.
had my daughter. So she was my first everything. And I remember feeling like I'm like exactly like you said, like I'm going to kill her. Like, how do I keep her alive? I can barely
Mhm.
keep myself alive. I can barely remember to pee at the time,
I
So I was like, how am I supposed to keep up here? So
know.
I couldn't agree more. It's really hard. And do you have any
Mhm.
advice by any chance for anyone who might be going through that with kind of
Yeah.
the privilege of hindsight kind of working in
Yeah.
your favor? Any advice that you would kind of recommend? Maybe something that you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm sitting here with a 6 and 4-year-old, but I feel like I can tap back into the emotional space of my fertility journey pretty quick. And there's a couple things that come to mind. The most important phrase that comes to mind is "You're not broken. You're not broken." Okay, there is something, but it's not you. Okay, and it doesn't mean you're any less of a person or any less of a human or woman or man. You're still a beautiful person and that you deserve answers. So, my advice would be document, document and research. We are not in a privileged situation where healthcare is arriving to meet our every need and are going to sit across the table and ask us what our goals are or are going to peel back the layers of the onion. It's just not the way the majority of our healthcare works in America. And so you, like you said, you had to become your own self advocate. What does good self advocacy look like? You document, you learn, you educate yourself. So document, educate, and then you need to learn how to communicate, whether that's asking the right questions, asking for more with your doctor, getting rid of them when they're not the right one for you, and
I
seeking
love that.
other clinicians. And if you do those things, I think you will become a self advocate. You'll build your confidence. And, there's also times where you have to say, how how hard am I willing to fight? There's people who give up for many good reasons. And so maybe you need to take a beat. That would be another thing. Like, do you need to take a beat? Do you need to take 6 months off and just be a human, enjoy life, relieve the pressure for a little while? It's okay to do that too. But if you are really in that pursuit, that obsessive, like hot pursuit, like document, educate yourself, and learn how to communicate. Those are the things I would offer.
I love that advice, and you mentioned a little bit of confidence in there, and I think that also it's not spoken about enough how much confidence you need to really advocate yourself and even to fire the doctors. Like that
Yes.
also takes a lot within you, and I know that the journey of infertility, especially having kind of battled it for such a long time, I'm sure you can relate. It sometimes you struggle with your self-worth, you struggle like, is it me? And you
Yeah.
start to ask yourself that question in so many different aspects, not even just about fertility during this time.
Yes.
And so, for people that are kind of feeling this and they're kind of in the pits of this, is there something that you kind of a piece of advice that you would give them?
About how they're feeling about themselves or their
Ye-
confidence.
Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, I would say nobody knows you better than yourself. And you can't expect a doctor to care more than you care about yourself, right? But you do need to find someone who's willing to listen to you. And if you're not being listened to, you're feeling dismissed, like your feelings are real, they are valid. But then the important thing is turning into action, you know? So don't let being dismissed and not listened to just be the way it is for you. Be okay with saying no, thank you, and moving on. You owe it to yourself because you know when something isn't right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that was kind of like a big moment for me, was the moment that I kind of, because also I kind of felt like at times like providers were even blaming me, like through the subtle like
Yeah,
verbiage
little
that they would use. Yeah. Like little things that they would say or like labels that they would put on me. And somehow I would leave the appointments feeling like it was somehow something I was doing wrong. And it wasn't
things.
until I kind of changed that and I was like, no, you know what? This is going to fuel me. And it wasn't until
Mhm.
I kind of that I was able to kind of take myself out of that hole because it can feel like a hole sometimes when you're kind of just blaming yourself for everything and it feels like everyone else is blaming you for the same
Yes.
things as well and it's like everyone's looking at you and it can be a lot. So I really resonated with that as well and
I was just gonna say, like, this is a traumatic experience. Okay. Everyone talks about trauma. Maybe trauma is overused right now, but like fertility journeys have trauma. And you just expressed some of it, like being maybe belittled or dismissed. Like these are things that impact us and how we feel about ourselves, you know? And that's my biggest thing is that treating, the call also is like, yes, you need to do the right tests as a clinician, but you also need to know the people across the desk from you are coming to you at their most fragile, hopeless, desperate, defeated, broken state. And your words and how you handle that person really, really matters. It really matters.
yeah, no, absolutely. And especially when you're talking about something like fertility, where there is a lot of beauty with fertility and infertility, but there's also a ton of grief, like a ton of grief behind almost every appointment, it seems like, until you are
Yeah.
able to conceive. So I think that there's a lot of highs and lows in a journey of fertility. And so I wanted to ask you, how did you navigate all the highs and all the lows and still kind of continue to tell your story and not let it cripple you almost?
Yeah, gosh, I love the whole concept of turning trauma into motivation or turning, like there's a song somewhere that says my trauma is my gasoline. And I think that's the things that are hard, the things that confront us with our own mortality or our deficiencies as a human put us back kind of in this place of like, oh, it happens to people and I am people. These are the things that can either make us or they can break us, you know? And I tend to index on making myself. I have a lot of other things in my life that have happened and a lot of reasons why I am who I am and do what I do and have built the life that I have. And I think where I'm going with this is that the highs and lows were definitely that. There were high highs and there were low lows. There's lows in that time period of 6.5 years that I've never experienced since. I would say I was clinically depressed, but I will also say the highs didn't come often. I didn't have a lot of high points. So I had to kind of create high points. I said, well, if we're not pregnant, you know what that means, Megan? We get to go and travel. So let's go to Portland and Seattle and go on a trip and let's go here and let's go there. And we were like, let's just act like it's just us and like do the things that we won't be able or want to do when we have a very young baby. And so we tried to like create those special moments in a different way because it's so easy to just sit back and feel woe is me and to just feel like a victim. It feels kind of comfortable there. What you need to do is engage with life. You need to engage with people. You need to talk to people. And then when you do hit those walls, I had to take breaks from trying. I was like, I can't do it again. I can't have another failed test. I can't emotionally deal with it. Like it's okay to take a break, recalibrate, and just go and enjoy life. I would say a baby isn't the only place of joy in life. They are amazing and wonderful and the highest point of my life now that I have 2, but there's so many other ways to cultivate joy and connection that, like, don't let your challenging times rob you in all aspects of your life.
I couldn't agree more, and I feel like sometimes it's really hard to do that, but I wanted to ask you because sometimes I know I did at least in those times, I relied a lot on my support system and on the people around me to kind of take me out of my grief and kind of out of those things and to be the ones to be like, "You know what? Like, let's go on a trip right now. Like, let's get out of
Yeah.
the house or let's go to the park. Let's get some fresh air. Let's go to the beach. Let's get some sunshine," whatever it is. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, is there anything, any pieces of advice that you can give to people who are supporting somebody through this journey that maybe you wish that support looked like for you during that time, or maybe things that were really supportful for you during this time?
Mm, gosh, a lot just came to my head. I had people who were very supportive that just listened and, dropped off the gift basket after our one loss and, beautiful, beautiful friends. I think doing those gestures, especially if you have a friend who's dealing with like multiple miscarriages, those little care packages or flowers or just, can I come and have a glass of wine with you tonight? Or those mean so much. So like show up and be there. I think that's part of friendship is you have to show up. What I would advise people against who are dealing with someone who's dealing with infertility is, like, don't over solution for them. Don't try to come up with the solve, unless they ask you. If they invite you to that conversation, like, "What else do you think it could be?" Then of course, but if they're just sharing what's going on, saying things like, "Have you frozen your eggs yet?" Or, "Have you tried IVF?" Or, "Have you done this?" Or, "Have you done that?" Can be it can cause some difficult emotions. So you know, don't think that you have to be the solver is probably the thing, but you do need to show up and be there and be a friend. And I think if they want your advice, they'll ask you for it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely, and I think that's a really good piece of advice because a lot of people need to hear it. Because even myself, I am such a solution-based person, so sometimes, especially the nurse in me, sometimes I can go down that rabbit hole myself where I can be like, I need to solve this problem, and
Yeah,
sometimes we need to realize it's not a problem for us to solve, you know? Like, that's not our role here. Our role here is to be the friend, not the provider. It's to be the friend and
exactly.
it's to be the person who's gonna hold their hand and drink the wine and listen to them and hold their hair back while they're crying or whatever it might be, you know? So I love that piece of advice, and I think that that's a really good one, and it kinda brings me to my next question about boundaries because I feel like during
Mhm.
this time of infertility, like, you have to set boundaries, not only with your providers and sometimes with your friends, but also like hearing things kind of like, "Oh, like, why haven't you had kids yet?" And like, how do you navigate that whole aspect of infertility?
Yeah, gosh, I came up with my at the time, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing, but for that question in particular, like, "Do you want kids?" I had a way I responded to that, and it was like, "Yes, we really do, it just hasn't happened for us yet." And it would always kind of, I think, make people go back like, "Ooh,
Oh,
retreat, retreat."
yeah.
Um, and I do think that that's important to note, like, in society, to not assume people want kids, but also to not assume they don't want kids just because they don't have them. I had people say like, "Oh, you guys are the power couple." And I'm like, "We're not trying to be a power couple. We're actually, like, trying to have the babies?"
Yeah.
Um, but I would say, like, I think, eh, it's a slippery slope, in terms of those questions and how you respond, but I think you do need to come up with your things that you can kind of fall back on. My biggest challenge was, like, I had such jealousy where I would see, "Oh, we're having a baby," or announcements or people having a baby shower and all their beautiful photos and or their newborn pics, and I'd just be like, "They came so easy to them. Why isn't it coming for me?" And I think the biggest recommendation would be, like, try to shut down that negative talk and try to celebrate other people even when you can't celebrate yourself. Because those types of feelings are like drinking our own poison. And again, it's about finding the joy. And yes, it does hurt and it's okay for it to hurt, but you can also hurt and feel happy. these
Yeah.
things can coexist. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely. I think that for me, I felt that a lot too. And for me, something that really helped me was like rephrasing it instead of being like, oh, like
Mhm.
that came so easy to them, or like, why can't it come as easy to me? Like I would just kind of say, like, oh, like I want that too. I know
Or
it
going
sounds
to
so
imagine for
stupid.
them. Maybe
Yeah.
one day it'll be me. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, but I think that also just acknowledging that, like, I want that as well, like, I can want a baby too. I can want a baby too, and
absolutely.
it doesn't make me a jealous person or anything, like, I can also want a baby and also be like, "Congratulations, I'm so happy for you, like, I can't wait to have a baby as well," you know? And I think
Yes.
that just acknowledging that because it almost felt taboo for me, to
Mm.
think any way to feel any way, shape, or form because I was like, "Am I not being a good friend?" But it's like, no, like I can want a baby too and also be so happy for you, I could be struggling in this and also be there for you in so many ways. So
Mhm.
I love that because that also I felt that a lot in my journey as well, and I wanted to ask you because I know that at least for me personally, my relationship with hope was like a roller coaster and through trying to conceive, and so I wanted to ask you because you mentioned that your provider, when he finally I kind of saw you, that was kind of something he mentioned. He was like, "I see so much hope here." So I wanted
Mhm.
to ask you, like, how did your relationship with hope kind of ebb and flow throughout your whole journey?
That word, it's so interesting because hope means so many things. So what do we do when we have hope? We keep trying. And when we don't have hope, we stop trying. So throughout those 6.5 years, I had both. I had, oh, I got pregnant and I lost it, but hey, we could get pregnant. And then a little spark of hope, or, oh, I think I found something new, or I think these Chinese herbs could be it. And I'd get new hope. Anytime there was a new path, I would spark hope. There was that time where I gave up hope and I just grappled and grieved the fact that I was never going to biologically conceive a child. I literally believed I was not going to conceive a child until, I don't know, a couple months, 3 months. I was like, I don't know. I think I still can. And then somehow I got hope back. And then my final doctor gave me even more hope that there was going to be a path. And so I think the biggest thing for me is that if I were to zoom out and say, like, how does hope relate to anybody going through this? Is like, just because one avenue is a dead end street doesn't mean there isn't another path. You have to find it. And it could be a new conversation you spark up within a group. It could be someone you meet that you talk and share your story. It could be a new clinician. It could be a new care team. Like, don't close yourself off to possibility because then you won't find hope.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's such a good piece of advice. And I thought that that would be a really nice note to kind of leave all
Yeah.
of the heavy conversation on before I dive into kind of the signature questions I like to ask
Oh,
every guest. But I wanted to, before we dive into these, I wanted to thank you again for sharing your story. And I know that at times it was not easy. So, again, I wanted to thank you. But so in regards to the signature questions, my first one, which again, I'm so obsessed with habits and I always like to ask people, what's one habit that's completely changed your life for the better?
yeah. I run or walk every single day. Whether it's 2 miles incline on the treadmill or 4 miles outside on the pavement, it helps me. I joke that it's like my Prozac because it keeps me even, it keeps me happy, it keeps me healthy, and it just makes my life so much better.
I love that. I started walking when I was pregnant because I was like, I'm so cooped up and I was so sick my whole
Yes.
pregnancy. I was like
Oh.
vomiting the whole time. And I was like, I'm
Mm,
just going to walk around the neighborhood to kind of just like change of pace. And it was so great. And now I try and do it with my kids. And it's so nice just to even like walk around the park and get out for a little bit. So I totally
mhm.
agree. I love that one. My next one, which I may know the answer to, but I don't want to assume. So, what is one book that changed your life?
Yeah, definitely making babies,
Yeah.
I learned. But I will say what's another one that I think about often, um, or maybe it's like it's actively changing my life, which is Jen Sincero's You're a Badass, which is all about abundant mindset and like growth mindset.
I
So
have it. I love it.
It's
I
great.
also have her other one that's, like, damn, I think it's like,
I
"You're a
can't remember
badass
either.
at making money," or something, like, about
Yeah.
changing your relationship and how you look at money, and, oh
Mhm,
my god, both of them, I love them both, they're great. She's a great
mhm.
author, I love her.
She
That's a
is.
good one. Okay, so my next question is if people are kind of multitasking and you want them to take away one thing from this conversation, what would it be?
Ask better questions and educate yourself and seek other providers if you're not getting where you need to go.
I think that's such a pivotal point in your story and something that you did so well, I will say.
Mm,
Because a lot of us just kind of stick to our doctor and that's who our insurance covers. And so, like, that it will be, if it's meant to be, it'll be kind of thing. But I think
mhm,
that's something that you did so well. Okay, so my next question is what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
mm. If it doesn't come to you, it's not for you. And it doesn't necessarily mean about children because I think if you want children, then they are for you, and I hope they do find their way to you. But I think about this in life in general. There's many times that we may have the job we're going for or like the house we wanted. And if it doesn't come to you, then it's just not for you. And then, something I say to myself all the time is if I knew the next thing, what was waiting behind the challenge or behind the hard time, then maybe I wouldn't be so worried. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it kind of brings me to my next question, which is what is something that you wish you learned earlier in life?
mm. What is something I wish I learned earlier? I don't know if I believe or operate in regret. And I think that I pretty much can forgive myself, move on. And I believe that everything I've done and has happened to me has built me to who I am. So I wouldn't change a thing. Maybe the only thing I wish I learned earlier because it affects my health is that my relationship with food. I think if I would have known about health and nutrition earlier, I could have led a bit of a healthier lifestyle as I was coming up. That's the only thing I can think about. Yeah.
And I think that's also a beautiful way to live. I try and live that way to my best abilities. I think there's only like two regrets I can think of off the top of my head. And one of them is so silly that I need to stop. It's like about a car that I'm like, I should have never
That's
gotten
a
rid
car.
of that car. But,
Oh.
I'm like, I shouldn't hold on to that. It's just, it is what it is. Like I still have a car. I'm able to
Yeah.
get to point A to point B. Like it's not that serious. But I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to live. And so, my last question would be who is the most influential, badass woman that you look up to? She could be living, dead, family, famous,
Mhm.
whoever you think of.
100% it's Maya Angelou. I have followed Maya Angelou for so many years of my life. I think she was a phenomenal she was an author, but also a philosopher and just a really, really thoughtful human being. And I think if you're ever feeling down about yourself, like listen to some things that Maya Angelou has to say. But she's just one of my favorite people to listen to read about, and is so inspiring. And she speaks a lot about being a woman and about self worth. And I think that we need more women like that.
I agree totally. And I love her and I love her work. So, that is a good
Mhm.
one. But thank you so much for taking
Yeah,
the
thank
time to come on
you.
today and speaking to me, Katrina. It was such a pleasure having you today.
Yeah, I enjoyed every minute. And again, thanks for what you're doing and for giving me a place to share my story. I really appreciate it.
No, of course. And I can't wait for you. You said you were writing your memoir, right? I
Yes.
can't wait for it to come out. I am such a big reader, so I cannot wait for to be able to read it. And I'm totally
I will
gonna
keep
read
you
Making
updated.
Babies. Yes, I'm gonna
Yes,
read Making Babies, and I'm going to let you know what I think about it because it
please.
sounds like it's right up my alley.
I hope you enjoy it. I loved your perspective. So.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on today. It was so nice meeting you. I'm gonna stop the recording, okay?
Mhm.